Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to say hi and welcome, and it is good to be back because I moved here 22 years ago onto Neville Road, 1982. And as you can see, the housing stock was slightly different from how it is now, and we started renovating. And basically, I think the state of the housing when we moved in was a little bit like the shopping offering. And over the next 10 years, I noticed and was glad to see that there was lots of independent retail, and it was blooming, and Church Street had an ever-increasing choice of lifestyle outlets. It was changing really fast. It was a great place to live and bring up my young family. And I'm delighted that my work has contributed to the memories of the ever-changing array of shops and the trends. So let's talk about why I decided to start photographing shops and then putting them all together as an A1 poster. Well, I suppose we can go back quite a long time to what influenced me as a child, which was Andy Warhol. And during the 60s, and then it was an active influence during the 70s. This led me to create these images as well as my posters, and as you can see, very influenced. A lot of you will have noticed that the bus card is here for sale. These were actually, the other images were actually done just as postcards and used to sell down in central London. But I've always been drawn to repetitive images and art design. I studied textile and two-dimensional design at Leeds Uni, and whilst I never did study photography, my eye was always drawn to photographing patterns in nature and buildings. My husband had an advertising company and a print house during the 90s, so we had the understanding of print and the image impact. It was already there, so I kind of was surrounded by the idea of advertising. And I saw shops and window dressing literally as colourful blocks of design. I mean, that's how my particular art and eye works. And these are Gaudi tiles. But to me, that's quite like what shops look like. Anyway, very colourful. And I had young children. I used the local shops, and I got to know a lot of the shopkeepers. And indeed, some of them became good social friends. So there wasn't an actual defining moment when I thought, okay, I'm going to do this poster. I was still employed, and I just thought it might be a good way to celebrate the strong community and to advertise the choice of shopping on Church Street, because as I said, it was changing very fast. And I always thought the shops were increasingly interesting and varied. So the work that I did was a peripatetic support worker within the voluntary sector. And it meant that I did travel all across what was then known as Greater London. And I got to see many, many different streets, high streets, communities, and came to consider that Stoke Newington was actually quite special. So, and I think we all think that. So basically, the project also gave a focus to my photography hobby. And at the time, I was not aware of another similar project, but later on, during photographing shops all over London, I did come across one old poster of a butcher shop in Islington, and I think that dated back probably to the 70s. I would have loved to have had it here to have shown you. I tried to track it down. I even phoned up the old butcher shop, but nobody had a memory of it, and nobody knew what I was talking about, but I knew that I saw it. So later, the why became more than just a project I wanted to do. I was made redundant from my work as a result of Thatcher's cuts, which some of you may remember. Back in those days, in the 80s, the voluntary sector became increasingly difficult to be employed in. So we're now looking at the 1994 poster, which was the first one that I did. And that was a project that I did, as I said, whilst I was still working, but I was made redundant. There we go. So I had to think about something else. So I'd already done the 94 poster. It had been successful, so I thought, well, here we go. I had 3 children. I didn't particularly want to go back into employment where I was tied to time, so I thought I'll go self-employed. And so it seemed to fit the bill. So off the back of the 94 poster, which by the way is credited to Alice Marketing by Design, which at the time I ran it through my husband's business. And I decided to launch my own sole trading company, and I called it Aspects of London. And these are the business cards. And I decided to replicate the model that I did with the 94 poster all over London, well, quite a few bits of London, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So I didn't do any research whatsoever that is recommended when setting off for a business. I just thought, okay, I was pretty confident because given the right choice of area, I thought that I could sell, and the 94 poster had been received well, and it confirmed for me the feeling of a community. So when I went out to do other posters, I was looking to replicate areas that I felt had a strong community. So Stoke Newington, as you probably know, eventually got 4 posters. It got 94, 95, 98 and 2007. Now, the 95 poster has the Hackney Council logo 2000 on it, which is a bit confusing, I know. But this was the logo at the time, even back in 95, that they were using in preparation for celebrating the upcoming turn of the century. And equally, on the 2007 poster, it has the Hackney Olympic logo. And that is because right back then, I mean, obviously it didn't happen to 2012, but as far back as just after 2005, when it was announced that we'd won the bid, they were using this logo. So Hackney Council, they were supportive. I mean, they didn't ever give me any money, but they did like to have their little logos on the posters, and that gave it, I thought, an extra bit of kudos, you know. Anyway, so in 95, it also saw the production of these. I did Soho, Camden Town, Covent Garden and Wimbledon. And then in 96, I actually did Crouch End, Muswell Hill and Islington Upper Street, and I was really busy. Muswell Hill, Crouch End and Wimbledon had a slightly different format of 36 images. You can see the slightly different shape there on those 2 posters. And later, I also had a small show in Islington Museum, and the only place for pictures sold the Islington images as canvases, and actually I forgot to put them out, but down there are some canvases, and they sold quite well actually, and I've got a couple of Stoke Newington on canvas as well. So let's get to about the how. How did I do this? Well, I started off by canvassing shopkeepers to see if they also thought it would be a good idea, and the response was positive. Some were a little surprised as they didn't view their shop fronts as visually interesting other than advertising their wares. So there was a delicate decision of who would be on the poster, and this was constrained by several factors, and it was a bit tricky. Okay, so the first one was a number I could fit on the A1 poster, so each image wouldn't actually be too small, and that turned out to be 42. And after all, as we all know, in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, 42 is the answer to everything. So we were blessed with that. The second issue was basically about my confidence and the shops I'd got to know and about approaching them, because you cold call shops, and it can be trying to track down the right person. The right person isn't always necessarily the person who's selling the goods. They might not be the owner. So you have to track down the right person and hit them with the idea that you want to stick their shop on a poster. And that sometimes felt a little daunting, especially when I was working in areas that I didn't live in and I really didn't know the area. Third, it was those who had longevity on the street that I thought, they've been here a long time and they deserve a place. And 4, quite frankly, the ones which offered an interesting and overall visual effect, well, in my eye. And then 5, there were those that were on board with the concept of using the poster as an alternative way of advertising for the street, but some literally were just not interested. They didn't want to know. And it was important But as this was now a commercial project for me, the reasons above may answer some questions about why shops are included and some are not, because each outlet agreed to pay £10 for a slot on the poster, because this covered the print cost. But most importantly, it kind of struck a deal between us, and I wanted to work with the owners so they could get their window dressing as they wanted it to be. And I needed to avoid all of this. So basically, I needed to avoid maintenance, painting work that was being scheduled, and trust me, there was always something. Sometimes I would go to a shop and find it had changed colour, or rubbish bags were stacked outside. As you can see, this is a typical day in Stoke Newington, just one day, and as you can see, all sorts of obstacles. I could go there, it would be obscured by cars, there would be workmen digging up the street, perhaps new street furniture had appeared, or often new stock had arrived, finding its place in the window. And I could wait weeks for the shop to be as the owner wanted it to look. I never took photos without the owner's permission, and the continuity was really important due to the nature of how I took the photos and then prepared them for inclusion in the overall image, which I will talk about a bit later. Anyway, as a new business, I needed a bit of publicity, and as luck would have it, a friend knew a friend who sourced articles for the old Woman's Realm magazine. Some of you may remember that. So these are some of the pictures that they took for the article. So I'm seen here with my trusty tripod, chatting to Inga, who became a good friend actually, and she owned Encore, and with my children at home helping to get stock ready for delivery. I mean, the actual article ended up being pretty cheesy, as my business setup was married together with the advertising of M&S clothing, with me as a clothes horse. So to be honest with you, I didn't usually dress like that at all. Still, any publicity was welcome because no social media as we know it back then. My children became very adept at rolling posters. They also enjoyed helping on my stall at the Stoke Newington Street Festival. I had a presence there for many years. Friends' children would also help out, giving me a chance to go off and have a wander. And Jamie at the back, who is still helping out, was one of those children, now fully fledged grown up. And also, as I was friends with one of the regular contributors to the N16 mag, somebody called Sue Hill, and she was a journalist, I was asked one year to capture some of the shots of the festival, and my business got a mention just down there in that little white box. So that was good. Right, we now get onto the subject how I actually did the poster. Well, it was an awful lot of film and time, really was. Going back to the 90s, technology was not around like it is now, especially in the domestic house. So it was basically all done by hand using a non-digital Canon camera. I had to send off for the prints of all the film that I had taken, so I never knew what the shots were going to look like. And there would be a lot of duds. So, back in that day, we used to take photographs. I'm sure some of you here will remember that, and you never knew what you were taking. You just had to wait and see what you had. So I have a couple of discs here that show an example of exactly how many photographs were taken. So this was a disc for 2007 poster, of which there are 396 photos taken just to get the one poster. Seems a bit excessive, but I'll explain later. It was all a massive learning curve, and I soon got to know the best times of day to shoot for how busy the road was going to be, the angle of the sun, avoiding the worst aspects of glass reflection, which was always an issue, general weather conditions, how best to avoid street furniture. This did actually lead to some very early mornings up a step ladder in the middle of the road, and I wish I had pics of this, but no smartphones and no selfies then. So it would have been great, wouldn't it, if I had a picture of me balancing up a ladder. So reflections were never quite limited, and as seen in this picture, my daughter in her buggy, there, I know, if you look very carefully, you will see that. It's in the 94 poster. She's featured. I always had her with me when I was doing the posters, the 94 one, that is. And she and her friends are also featured in the 98 image. So this is an example of the fun we had, including community and working with the owner. Now, I'm pretty sure that Sue Hill's daughter, Molly, is there somewhere. I can't recall the children's names, but maybe they might actually recognise themselves or remember doing it, because they will all be about 31, 32 years old now. And I actually know the owner. The owner at the time, her daughter is on there somewhere as well. So that was great fun. So later on, I did upgrade to a digital Canon camera, but I still sent the film off to be printed. So I mentioned before about taking so many photos, and hopefully this will explain why. So the next stage was assembling the images. You can see here an example of how I would literally cut up the photos and paste them back together again. Each shop would have at least 5 or 6 or maybe more photos from slightly different angles and focusing on different aspects of the shop. I would take the best features and marry them together. So if you actually look at the middle where it says the dervish, you can see that's quite wonky, and you've got a wonky look. So we've got that bit of frame there, which gets put on and everything gets straightened up, and, you know, it looks quite good. So the next thing was I would need to take photographs of the name of the shop, but I also was focusing on the window dressing, so we would need a close-up of the window dressing. But quite obviously, if you look at the frame factory, if you've got a close-up of the shop, there's no way you're getting the name of the actual shop in. So I would take the 2 photos, slice them up, and put them together in order to get... So what you're seeing on the poster is an artistic, you know, it's not actually exactly as the shop was, and you'll know that when you take your photos. So that's what I used to do. And actually, again, on the posters, if you have a look, I didn't do it on every one. So some of them don't have their full name on. And if I was doing it now, it would be different. And I used to worry a lot at the time, because this was my business, this was how I was earning a living, that someone would come along and do exactly the same thing, but only better. But actually, I think it turns out if they got down to it and saw all the work that went into it, they probably couldn't be bothered anyway. So I would then take the 42 6x4 images that would make up the poster and consider the arrangement re colour weight. And you can see here how each poster, and this is in my eye, has a definite colour hue. So for me, 94 is green, 95 is russet, 98 is definitely blue, and 2007 is a great pinky sort of yellow. And as far as possible, I would follow the shop placements as they were on the street. But because of the colour hues, sometimes the colour weight pictures didn't always allow this. And you could end up with a big bunch of blue or bunch of red. So sometimes I had to swap the pictures around just so you didn't get this block colouring going on within the poster. And also after 94, some of the shops weren't actually on Church Street, they were on the High Street. So once I was happy with the overall effect, I would stick the 42 prints down on a piece of board, and a rostrum photo was taken, which is a shot taken from directly above the mounted images. And that photo was finally turned into transparencies, which I still have. So the text artwork was produced, and this was all taken to the printer. As I alluded to before, my husband and I had connections through his work for this all to be done. So I remember very clearly the first print run being done at a print factory down in the Elephant and Castle, but unfortunately I cannot remember the name. So I went with the transparency, the artwork, and the original board for colour matching, and I would be there when they did the first test runs. And you can just about read down the side, you can see all the colour test runs, and it says Islington 1000 third on press. So that was one of the original test ones. And together we'd look at this, I'd have all my original photographs stuck on the board, and we'd do the colour matching, and it would get tweaked. So you'd never get an exact colour match, because as fast as you tweaked one colour, you were untweaking another one. But anyway, once I'd agreed and signed off, they would do 1,000 print run. This was the minimum number to keep the actual retail cost down. and make it affordable. So, you know, when selling to the public, it was not a ridiculous price. At the time of my first 94 poster, I actually had no idea if I could sell 1,000 posters. I mean, each shop on the poster got a free copy or two, thanks to their support. And Stoke Newington Bookshop, Route 73, and later Early Bird did sell. And I have to say that Stoke Newington Bookshop wasn't even on the first poster. So that was really good of them. And you can see on this Early Bird there that originally, I mean, this was taken years ago, decades ago, they've actually got one of the posters in the window. And many of you will know that Early Bird and Stoke Newington are selling again, which I really value their support in doing that, because that's what it all relies on. So going back to the rather cheesy pictures of the Woman's Realm magazine, so that's Early Bird, and that's the bookshop selling. But there you go. Do I ever look like that? No. So storage was a problem. I now had thousands of posters and I didn't have any storage. So we bought a plan chest, lugged it up into the bedroom, and that is where I used to keep them, as well as under the bed. So it really was a one-person show. And as time went by, technology advanced, especially into the home. I began to put the images on disc, and then I worked on an Apple Mac and electronically sent them off to print images to the printers. So in 2010, I decided to put the images onto A5 card format, and that went very well as too. You know, I think people quite like the option of having a smaller version. So I now have 4 ways which shows the development of technology and keeps my images safe. As I said, I have the original photographs that were stuck on the board. I have the negatives that were made for print, images on disc, and latterly electronically held in the cloud, so no chance of losing them, hopefully. So, inspired by Amir's great book, The History of Every Shop in Stoke Newington, I decided to do a few stats of my own. So, the 1994 obviously saw the first 42 images. 95 had 18 repeats. 98 had 22 repeats of both the 94 and 95, and this is because often shops were quite different. They changed colour and they had longevity. They were still there and they were popular and loved. 2007 had 14 repeats, and in all 144 shop fronts and pubs are represented across the years on the posters. So it would appear that over the years I have obtained a small notoriety within this area and around North London. And after I moved out of Stoke Newington in 2004, I continued to sell via my website, and I did a few more images of the Peak District, and I returned staying with friends to complete the 2007 poster. And I was motivated by the Olympic bid and later went on to become a games maker. So because I really couldn't miss out on my borough hosting just because I'd moved out of town. So basically, I think this passion showed through in my first interview. I took the poster with me and showed them. And I think that must have swung it, because I did finally get through all of the interviews and I was accepted and I was ecstatic. Not living in London at the time, I hadn't totally picked up on the vibe that some locals were not as enthusiastic as me. Anyway, only Stoke Newington can support the sale of 4 posters. That's 4,000 in all, a testimony to the very strong community and a constant influx of new people identifying Stoke Newington as a good place to live. The areas of Crouch End, Muswell Hill and Wimbledon, they all sold out of their posters, but remember they only had 1,000 each, they didn't have the 4,000. The central posters didn't do so well, and I believe that this is because the product appeals to a community living in the area and also having the shops available to sell. So I've got approximately 400 left of each of the Covent Garden, Soho and Camden Town. So going back, 94 Stoke Newington posters only, and in fact this number's now changed because you've been buying them whilst you're here. But when I arrived here, I had 153. That's all that's left. There are, I think, 3 now left of the 95 edition. Of the 98, we've got 123, and 2007, 480. I wasn't living at London at the time, well, not in Stoke Newington, so I wasn't quite pushing it as much. So, and I'm never intending to repeat 1,000 poster runs. So when these original posters are sold, it may be a good few years before another relaunch. And I think my children will take up this task over the next 20 years, possibly. However, it's not going to be the way it is now. I mean, many of you, if you go onto Etsy, will know that you often just buy the actual image and then you print it yourself. So I think the days of printing out thousands of posters and selling them are kind of gone, as have, you know, poster shops that used to exist. Interestingly, the old Midland Bank had the 1994 poster hanging up at its main entrance, an indication that a very corporate business also felt the pull of the community. And looking back, I really wished I had taken photos of places I saw my posters hanging up, because they were, when they were, you know, originally done, there was a lot of them hanging around Stoke Newington, not just in houses, as you've mentioned, but out in shops and pubs and in the bank. I actually think the post office had one as well. So it would have been really handy for this talk if I had taken photos. And if anybody does have photos of posters hanging around in shops or strange places, you can always email them to me at, it's just at Aspects of London. And recently one guy did just that. He sent me a poster of, in his aunt's house, of the 94 one. And then he went on to say, did you ever do Islington? And I said, I did, but they've all sold out. But anyway, I agreed to get 10 printed for him, and he bought all of those. He's going to give them as Christmas presents. So I believed in their historic value, and I carried them really carefully around with me every time I moved. Used to think it was only me that had this strange passion for photographing Stoke Newington shops and the urge to record them. And in fact, now you can see on Etsy and places like that, there's a lot of people who've taken to painting shops, and they really are a fresh style. But I think my posters are a reflection of their time, in their kind of vintage time. So, but one thing that I did do is I also did take interior photographs of shops that I personally loved, and that's the woodwork stall. And the woodwork store was amazing. I absolutely loved that place. So you could always go there, and the guys were great, and they used to wear the brown classic, you know, overalls. And the thing was, they couldn't get anyone to take it over when they were all retiring, which was really sad. And the same with the eel shop. That's a bit further down towards Dalston. So I did used to take ones that I particularly liked and thought had a historic value. And I was amazed and very happy to see that Amir was also doing the same in your very own original way. And it was mainly through the TV interview on the BBC local programme that really galvanised me to relaunch, because I happened to just, by sheer luck, see this article. I don't know if any of you saw it, on the BBC. I think it was the local news at lunchtime. And I thought, heck, I said, there's somebody who's absolutely, you know, just really into shops in Stoke Newington. So that's when I contacted Amir. And I thought I'd had over time, because I've been thinking of relaunching for ages, but hadn't really kind of pushed it and got on with it. And so occasionally I would have a little flurry and send off emails and see where the interest was. Never got a reply. And then when Amir just immediately whizzed back to me, I was like, wow, this is great. So anyway, that's how the relaunch came about, because I always thought that this product is kind of vintage now and would become interesting again. I mean, when you first do them, they kind of go a little bit out of fashion. You know, it's kind of like, oh, well, that was last year's or just 2 years ago. But obviously, when you wait 20 years, 30 years nearly, they become very interesting again. So I was surprised about what Amir has said, is that people wondered who did them, because I just thought, well, Heidi in Early Bird always knew it was me. Joe in the bookshop always knew it was me. And friends that still live here and knew me when I lived here always knew it was me. So it's been great that there has been such an interest, and it has made me very happy, and it's gratifying, because quite genuinely I am a bit of a free spirit, and I've lived in Lytham, Leeds, Liverpool, Matlock, Wales and Devon. But this is actually quite truly the place when I come home, where I really feel I'm coming home. And I do think that's because I had that fantastic forging with the community, and it's where I brought my children up. And I think when you do that in an area, it stays with you. So all I can say is thank you for coming here and listening to my story. Lovely Stoke Newington. And so just a little plug, as you've noticed, I do have products here for sale, and I can say they make fantastic Christmas presents, especially if you've got folk that used to live here and have moved out. So yes, thank you again for listening to this story. And